So following on from last week's video where I did the maintenance in hot climates to help prevent checking and splitting, I discovered that this coffin smoother actually had split here on the mouth that you can see just here, and the blade is actually jammed in there because the wood is shrunk. And so because it's dried out, the timber's actually shrunk and it's splitting either side of that blade. So today we're going to tackle what is a fairly simple process, but what we're going to do to actually correct this so our blade can come in and out of that hand plane, because this might be its new stuck state. So let's jump down here and we'll get started. So in last week's video you saw that I loosened this wedge, so I can actually just take this wedge out, but that blade we can see is actually a little bit stuck. And we can see that it did split here, as I mentioned before. So what we got to do is try and get this out, and luckily for me that actually came out relatively easy. But now, how are we going to sort it out so it doesn't continue to get jammed in that mouth? Well, there really isn't only one approach. We're smoothed down to maybe 5-6 mil here on the sides, either side, so we can't actually remove material from the inside of this wood, so we're not going to be removing material off here. However, there is one thing that we can remove material off, and that is the blade and the chip breaker. So what we're going to do is actually take some material off either side or both sides, it doesn't really matter, of the blade and the chip breaker, so we actually get that freedom. Only really a few millimeters that we're going to have to take off for this to work. So I've got a couple of things here that I could use to do this. First up, you could use a bench grinder if that's something you've got. I don't really have a bench grinder that I like to use, and I like to show the hand tool approach, so we're going to stick with hand tools today. So first of all, I have a single cut mill file. I have a 240 grit diamond stone here, or just some 240 grit sandpaper. So I'm going to use a combination of just to show you the approach I would go with using these. Obviously, I'm going to start with the diamond stone just so you can see how quick and easy that is to use. If you've got one, that's going to be very simple. So we'll start with that, then move into sandpaper, which is going to be obviously a very similar approach, but I'll show you how I do that. And then we'll probably move back to the mill file, because that's going to be probably the easiest, because on these old blades most of this is all soft steel, so it's going to file really easily, and it's only the last little bit towards the edge where they actually laminate a piece of hardened steel in there for the sharpening edge, and so we might be able to get away with using the file for most of it, but we may need to revert to a bit of sandpaper or the diamond stone in this last little bit up here just to ensure that we get the clearance we need. So I don't remove more material off the chip breaker to the blade. We're going to leave it in its connected state like this. We're going to make sure that it all sits here nice and square, that this is square, so any out of squareness in the chip breaker we can correct at the same time as well, which this one does happen to have. The chip breaker is a little bit wider than the blade. First of all, diamond stone. Going to just put a piece of paper towel down under it to collect any of the water. I don't want it on my bench if I can avoid it, and it's going to catch any of that metal swarth as well. So I'm just going to squirt it with water. I'm going to remove the material fairly quickly, and I think it's best to do both sides. You could just do it from one side. It depends if you want to make sure that you've got one square side, which we can do anyway. So we can see here that it's coming up quite shiny, and because my chip breaker was slightly out of alignment, I'm still removing a little bit off the chip breaker before it actually hits the blade there, but down on this bottom corner here you can see it started. So that's how we use the diamond stone. So let's jump in and I'll show you what I'll do with the sandpaper. So for this, flat reference of melamine, grab some double-sided tape, and you don't have to tape it down, but it's going to stop it moving around, which is going to be a lot better. You don't have to cover the whole bit, just most of it so it stays down. Push that onto the surface here, flick the knife under the corner here and just lift that off. Make sure it's stuck right down, out nice and flat. And with this process, you can obviously change the grit out regularly so you can keep it nice and sharp, so it's going to actually work a lot faster. And sandpaper, even if you do reach that hardened steel, unlike the possibility of a file, it might skirt across it and not sharpen it. With sandpaper you don't have that problem, just like with the diamond stone. So it's essentially just a cheaper way of doing it, and it works just as well. Just work back and forwards like this. Now remember, when you're doing this, if you're doing it on a jack plane, you might want to remove slightly more to allow the blade to advance a little bit further. With a smoothing plane like this, it doesn't need to advance far because it's a smoother. So we're looking for it to maybe protrude no more than 1 millimeter. So that is the difference here. So I can feel that that's getting a little stuck as it gets down to this point, so I'm going to remove a little bit more. And to do that, I'm going to jump over to the file, and I want to show you how we can use the file to do this. So for safety, we're going to drop this into the vise, and that's just going to make it that little bit easier. I try to run the entire surface where possible, but if you end up removing enough so it doesn't get stuck and you've got enough movement, remember you've got to have enough movement so you can knock the blade side to side to adjust it. And so that's why we need to remove that little bit more. Even though it would probably work right now, we want to remove that little bit more just so we can get that side to side movement in there so we can actually get the blade square. So we choose whatever side we are sharpening, or if we're doing both. And what I do is I rest this down. So see how I've got the screw here? I just rest that on top of the jaws. Try and keep it as square as I can, because keeping it square here means that you've got a flat reference so you have a better idea of where flat is while you're filing. And you can either come in like this or coming straight like this, so you can get a better idea. Ever so slight angle is actually best for this, because then you can actually keep your thumb or your finger on the inside of the blade here, and that kind of acts like a little bit of a fence to keep you going straight and as square as possible. Now I apologize for the noise this makes, because it does squeal a little bit and it's kind of unavoidable. And with these, I still like to turn them over, just so you're evenly wearing your file. Now you can also draw file like this, and it actually changes the angle of the way the file tooth actually hits it, and it can be a much smoother cut. But I would suggest that if you've got a file like this, do the file first. Do the majority of the movement with the file, because it's going to be quicker, and a file's a lot cheaper than, say, even a diamond stone. And so do the tough work with something that's going to make it happen faster. It's just like with woodworking. We use the scrub plane or the 4-plane first, remove the rough stuff, then come in with the smoother planes and whatnot. So be sensible with this. The same thing applies to woodworking. Use your fast removals first. If you're using 80 grit sandpaper because that's all you've got and you don't have a file, go ahead, use that first. Get the majority of the work done, and then we can just smooth it out afterwards. I'm coming down onto this cutting edge, which is where we need the material removed. I'm going to flip the blade over like this. Now this blade seems to be slightly tapered, so I am actually hitting the bottom edge of the blade here, where most of the problem is while doing this. So that's just something you want to keep in mind. So now that I've put the blade in here, we can see there is a little bit of movement up the top here, which will allow us to hopefully keep this, square this blade up. And we can see that the blade is actually pushing all the way through. So it does mean that it's no longer catching on the edges here. What I'm going to now do is just go back to the sandpaper and polish it out, because as that sandpaper breaks down through its friability, it's going to go from a little coarser to a little finer, and it'll give us that final polish, I suspect. So let's jump down here and we'll do that. And up here you can see how shiny that is on the camera, hopefully. And so we've removed material a little bit off here and a little bit more off the chip breaker. Now it is possible that it wasn't so much jamming on the blade but jamming on that chip breaker, so that's another reason to actually do them together, is that you can adjust the fit through both of them, because there is a chance that the chip breaker, since it was wider than this blade, might not have been the original chip breaker, and that's something you've got to bear in mind when you're doing this sort of stuff. So you do find a lot of mix and match with wooden planes, especially when you're buying them second hand, and over time you don't really know what's happened to it, and so it's always a good idea to check all the componentry of hand planes when you get them, which I didn't do when I first bought this one, and this is just a way that we can correct it. So it's no big deal, but it's also something when you're buying used, it's something to look out for. So now what we'll do is we'll go ahead, fit this blade assembly back into the plane, give it a quick adjustment, and see if we can take a shaving with it and adjust it so it's square. And so the blade's going to come straight in like this. It's going to touch the bottom there. I'm holding it back so it's pushed into the back. We'll get the wedge here, give the wedge a little tap, and that's locking it in. And now we need to adjust it. So currently the blade is high on this side, and so we're just going to tap that across, hit it on the back to retract it slightly, and that is pretty well adjusted now. There we go. And so if we look at that now, that blade will rock side to side and is no longer jammed, and so we've corrected the problem. With that split there on either side of the mouth, I'm not going to worry too much about them, because if this is the most trunk it's going to get, they're only little tiny splits. If it does happen to expand again and close those gaps up, there's no real problem. And as long as that blade stays clear, it's not going to cause any further issues. And so because this is shrunk to its smallest size at the moment, I don't foresee that as an issue, and I don't believe there is any real need to do any further work on that. Now, if these splits were worse, you could go ahead and get a syringe or something, put some glue in it and clamp them shut, but in this case it's only small, it's not really affecting the use of the plane, and so at this point I'm not going to do any further work to this. I think I've successfully shown you the easiest way to correct these, because as we said at the start, there is no way to really remove more wood off the plane, nor would you want to, because it may weaken it, because it's already in its final design and size. So if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing down below. It really does help the channel out more than you know. And while you're down there, please comment. Let me know if you'd like to see some more videos related to wooden hand planes and correcting some of the issues that might creep up, because I know they're actually fairly affordable, and a lot of you might be thinking, why don't I just grab myself a wooden plane, which is what I did. And I had to work it out from watching other videos and doing some research as to how to correct the issues. And so if that's something you'd like, please let me know. And if you'd like to support me a little bit further, please consider checking me out on Patreon and also on Instagram. And if you'd like to see some more videos such as this, check out the video up here where I show you the regular maintenance that I do to a wooden hand plane, and also the playlist of all other maintenance videos. Bye for now.